Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. He's making news this morning on his efforts to protect Special Counsel Robert Mueller. We'll get to that in just a moment. Also with us, America's former ambassador to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Ambassador Daniel Baer, is with us. But first, Joe, we go to Hong Kong.
So just to follow up on the president's tweet, if you're just joining us, the president tweeted this morning, "Get ready, Russia. The bombs will be coming, nice and new and smart. You shouldn't be partners with a gas-killing animal who kills his people and enjoys it." That was several minutes ago. He's now followed up with this: "Our relationship with Russia is worse now than it has ever been, and that includes the Cold War. There is no reason for this. Russia needs us to help with their economy, something that would be very easy to do, and we need all nations to work together. Stop the arms race?" the president asks. Joe.
Yes, and Richard Haas, that is the carrot following the stick. And again, and it's what I had said, what we were talking about before, that yes, there is a possibility for us to sit down and actually improve our relationship with Russia. But certainly we can't do that if Donald Trump seems, as I'll say the word again, obsequious to Vladimir Putin and desperate for a relationship or a friendship with Vladimir Putin. That I will say it and people will get angry. It's just the truth. As Barack Obama was starting to 2007, at the end of 2007, talking about the possibility of an Iranian deal. If the president shows some toughness, there is the possibility of an arm's length agreement with Putin and Syria that could make a difference. What would that agreement look like?
Joe, let me just push back a little bit. The president can't accomplish his foreign policy ends if he's obsequious or has naive views about Vladimir Putin or anybody else. On the other hand, he can't accomplish it if he's overly confrontational. This is a dangerous time. U.S. commitments in Europe are far greater than our capabilities. We still live in an era where the United States and Russia each have thousands of nuclear weapons. Russia has greater military assets in Syria than we do. So the president's style is always to confront and provoke, and then hopefully he creates a context for compromise. He just did it with China in trade. He's doing it with Russia now. This is a dangerous game. It's a dangerous game given that Russia is now essentially a one-dimensional power. Its one dimension is military power. All Vladimir Putin has going for him is nationalism. It's as if nobody in the White House ever read anything about 1962 and the Cuban Missile Crisis. The president's right. We have less of a relationship with Russia now than we did with the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War. But that also is an argument for a little bit of caution. We need to be tough with them, but disciplined tough. This is not disciplined tough. This is the reason we've created a National Security Council, to make sure that when we confront our adversaries, we do it in a careful, disciplined manner. This ought to make people take pause.
Well, I agree with you, Richard. We though are in the middle of the Trump administration, and you are exactly right that a lot of negative, harmful rhetoric towards China actually was matched with the president building a relationship with the president there, and we'll see what comes out of that. Again, I'm not defending the president's approach at all. My question, though, remains, and let me go to Senator Chris Coons. Senator, our relationship with Russia is as bad as it has been probably since the early 1980s, maybe 1980, when we refused to send our athletes to the Olympics in Moscow. So the question is, how do we move back from that position, and what is the first step in that process, and what could we agree to in Syria with the Russians that would actually help us move towards a more constructive relationship with a country that we have to have a constructive relationship with?
Well, Joe, I'll agree with Richard that the only thing that's worse than a bad plan is no plan. And it is unclear to those of us in the Foreign Relations Committee or the leadership of Congress exactly what the president's plan is with regards to Syria and, more importantly, Russia.
I understand that. I understand that. You both are saying that. My question to both of you is, what does a constructive plan look like? What should we have people inside the White House advising the president to do. What does that plan look like going forward? We understand Donald Trump is a hothead. We don't want him to be our commander-in-chief. He is. What should James Mattis be recommending to the president this morning that he do to make this relationship more constructive?
First, the president just 2 weeks ago was saying that we should withdraw fully from Syria. I think that partly created this crisis. The president should not withdraw from Syria abruptly. It is our presence on the ground. It is our ongoing engagement with the Kurdish forces that help take out most of ISIS that gives us the presence in Syria that also gives us leverage at the diplomatic table.
With all due respect, I understand, Senator. I wrote a column in the Washington Post about that this past weekend. I agree. So I go back to my question for you and for Richard Haass. What does a constructive path forward look like between the United States and Russia? How can we use this crisis? How can we leverage this crisis to actually make a constructive step forward in American-Russian relations? It is a given that Donald Trump is making a terrible mess of things. What should we be doing instead?
Joe, I would be totally in favor of the United States joining the international talks about the future of Syria. These have been quietly going on behind the scenes. We have essentially been a non-participant. And this is the only path I can think of where one day, not anytime soon, you would actually see a successor government. I'd be more than happy to have as soon as we have a Secretary of State, for him to sit down with Sergei Lavrov and talk about the future of Syria. In the meantime, though, we need to, as the senator said, keep control of the 25% of Syria that the Syrian Kurds have. If anything, I'd potentially maybe even slightly increase the U.S. force presence there just to send a message. Whatever we do punitively now is a message sender. But the real question is, let's begin to reestablish a diplomatic relationship with Russia. For example, there hasn't been a congressional delegation there in 4 or 5 years. Let's begin those again. So let's be both tougher with them with sanctions, with our military force, but also more interactive with them diplomatically. We need to get both sides of this right.
I agree that we need to have delegations.
What do you think?
I agree that we need to have congressional delegations engage with the Russian government, and President Trump's ambassador to Moscow has specifically urged that. Russia blocked the most recent delegation of senators that tried to go to Moscow for meetings. We also have to hold Russia accountable for Assad's murderous actions against his own people. Sure. He can't just use chemical weapons against his own people without consequences. So we need to commit to staying in the country. We need to hold Russia accountable for the crimes being committed by Assad and actively engage in a diplomatic strategy, which includes being willing to commit to helping rebuild Syria if there is a future transition in government post-Assad.
Okay, so Ambassador Baer, why don't we bring you in this way? How holding Russia accountable, obviously easier said than done. What are the pitfalls?
Sure, obviously easier said than done, and also the obvious point, and one of the points that I'm sure Richard would agree on, is that we're not going to solve the U.S.-Russia relationship on the ground of Syria.
Or on Twitter.
Or on Twitter. I think, with respect to the president's tweet this morning, we have this very disturbing once again, a childish action without a strategy. And so we need a strategy for Syria, and whether there's a kinetic element to that should exist in a broader context. Separately from that, or related to that, we do need to do hard work on engaging with Russia, but we have to have engagement with toughness. And one of the things, obviously, there was the exchange of diplomatic expulsions, which had huge consequences on our diplomats based in Russia. But we need to go after Russian oligarchs, the people who are the backers who hold up Putin's mobster-style regime, and we need to make sure that we are ready to do that. But we have to do that in the context of a broader strategy. Again, the onus is on President Trump now to show that he has a plan. Last year he took kinetic action, and he came out for 2 minutes, he talked, but he had no plan to use any other tools than 59 Tomahawks, and you have to have a broader plan.
And we don't know that his tweets prove that there's a plan. We've actually seen his tweets kind of stand in the middle of nowhere and end up sometimes not being at all the plan. Susan Page, you spoke with Madeleine Albright yesterday. We're going to be having her on later this morning. But what are your thoughts on this? And you have a question for the ambassador.
One of the concerns that Madeleine Albright expressed to me yesterday was who's giving the president advice? And this is a question that could apply on everything from Stormy Daniels to Russia to Syria. The Secretary of State left. The new Secretary of State has not been confirmed. A new national security advisor as of this week. He seems to be cleaning house.
Yeah.
And I think there's concern by both domestic and foreign policy advisors that is the president hearing smart voices, and is he hearing from people who can say, you don't want to follow your instinct on this, you need to do this other smart thing. And I wonder what you think about that, the power of the advisors around him to affect what it is he's going to be doing.
Yeah, and I think there's actually two questions there, right? One, is he hearing smart voices? And second, is he capable of listening to those smart voices if they're there? I think one of the, obviously we have the nominee for the new Secretary of State having his hearings on Thursday. One of the challenges there, and this is obviously John Bolton's first week, one of the concerns there is that those two people represent people who are hawkish, who don't believe in diplomacy, and who are likely to be yes men. And I think one of the assets that any strong leader has is people who will challenge their instincts and say, sir or ma'am, I'm not sure that's the best idea in this case. And it's not clear to me that either John Bolton or Pompeo is ready to challenge Trump with respect to his more hawkish instincts.
Senator Coons, so in the backdrop of all this, as the president devises a war plan, a potential war plan, is the Russia investigation and his growing concerns about where it may be headed. You this morning in some news have joined forces with Republican senators, Tom Tillis, Lindsey Graham, Cory Booker, also on board for this legislation, the Special Counsel Independence and Integrity Act. This is the much discussed law that would protect the special counsel from being fired by the President of the United States. Why do you believe specifically that legislation like this is necessary?
I think it is in our best interest as a country, our republic, the rule of law. It's in the president's best interest to make sure that Robert Mueller is able to complete his investigation uninterfered with by the president. And the threats that the president's been making on Twitter and in his press comments earlier this week, the way he characterized the so-called break-in to Michael Cohen's office and hotel room, and the way he's dismissed the investigation as a witch hunt, has many in Congress concerned that the president may, in fact, abruptly fire either Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, or try and fire Robert Mueller directly, which would cripple his presidency. We are simply trying to step up as Congress and take action. I'm going to be urging Judiciary Chairman Grassley and Majority Leader McConnell to take this bill up promptly. Back to the Russia context. The Senate and the House acted in a strong and bipartisan way to enact a law that pushed the president to put sanctions on Russia after they interfered in our last election. Right. This is another moment where strong bipartisan action could prevent the president from doing something abrupt that would really harm rule of law and his presidency.
But as you know, Senator, there's great resistance among Senate Republicans, including from the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who said this law is not necessary. Other Republican senators have said it, in fact, may be unconstitutional. What do you say to the Majority Leader of the Senate who says we don't need this law because the president would never take the step of firing Bob Mueller?
Well, first, the D.C. Circuit just confirmed in an opinion in January that it is still good law, that it is possible for us to move forward with a law that prevents the president from firing the special counsel for other than good cause. It upheld a longstanding decision in that case. More importantly, I think that the events of this past week may have changed some minds in the Republican caucus, that there is a moment here for the Senate to stand up and to save the president from himself.
It is called the Special Counsel Independence and Integrity Act. It is bipartisan. We'll see how far it gets in the Senate. Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, thanks as always for your time. Former Ambassador Daniel Baer, thank you as well. Still ahead this morning, much more on the president.